Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call to order this regularly scheduled Intergovernmental Relations Committee. I'm Andrew Johnson, the chair of the committee, and I'm joined today by a quorum of our committee members. With us today are Council Members Schrader, Bender, and our Vice Chair Jenkins. We have 2 items on our agenda, and we also have a walk-on item as well, so I'll include that business with us. We will add that as, how about if it's okay with Council Member Bender, Council President Bender, we'll add that as the 3rd item on our agenda here. And so we do have one consent item. It is the Youth Coordinating Board Joint Powers Agreement. So I'll go ahead and move that consent item. Is there any discussion on that? Not seeing any. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the motion carries. We will now move on to our discussion items, and our first discussion item is the 2019 Legislative Agenda and Policy Positions. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Sasha Bergman with the IGR Department. We are here before you today to present some of the new legislative items that came through our policy development process. As you know, our departments began meeting with us beginning in June, and we've been working with them to process around 50 different legislative items that have come up and figuring out kind of what the next steps are for each of those. What we have before you today are, I think, 11 different policy proposals that our staff are here to briefly present to you about. Just a word about some of the other items that have come forward. Many of them may have been federal in nature. Maybe they were already in our legislative agenda, or we're not quite ready for moving forward and needed some further discussion with stakeholders and things of that nature. And if you have any questions about those items, I'd be happy to provide you more information. But what we have today is new legislative items to put in, or recommended to be added to our legislative policy positions, which is our longer document that we use at the legislature to guide our advocacy. And then also a list, kind of a short list of 2019 legislative agenda items, which is probably a more focused list of things that we think we would be working on mostly after the election and having a better sense of kind of what the direction of the legislature will be. We try to tailor that list based on kind of the context that's happening at the legislature. If there aren't any questions about our process so far, just briefly mention that the different items that we have before you are also incorporated, their language is incorporated into the new document, and we sent to the clerk, and I think they're posted online, 2 versions of the document. One is the draft version of what it would look like if all of the changes are adopted, sort of a clean version, and then the other one is shows all of the amendments, so you can be very clear about what the changes are that we're proposing. The first 2 items are in the municipal and regional governance section on pages 8 and 9. The 3 items about housing are included in the new housing policies on page 13 and 14 of the clean document. The 4 health-related items that we will be discussing are on pages 14 through 16 of the city livability section. And then the last 2 items from Public Works that we will be presenting to you here are on pages 16 and 17. And before I turn it over to Chuck Bernardi from our Human Resources Department, I just wanted to give a huge thanks to our entire policy liaison team. They spend a tremendous amount of time going through different conversations within their departments to bring ideas forward, to talk with us, to talk with outside stakeholders, to bring these ideas before you. And so just want to thank all of them, especially the staff that are here today to present. With that, I will turn it over to Chuck Bernardi.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Johnson, members of the IGR subcommittee. My name is, as Sasha said, my name is Chuck Bernardi. I'm from the city's Human Resources Department, and I'm here today to present information and gain your support in adding this phased retirement option, or PRO, to the city's 2019 legislative agenda. The Minnesota Public Employee Retirement Association, also known as PARA, program gives employers the option to allow employees to transition into retirement rather than fully separate from employment. In other words, the PRO is an excellent tool enabling the city to meet their workforce needs while certain employees move to full retirement. The PRO permits an active member of the Para General Plan who is at least 62 years of age to begin receiving their para pension without a formal termination of employment. However, employees participating in the program must substantially reduce their work hours while working in the program. And allowing an employee to participate in the PRO is at the discretion of the city. The law enabling the PR program is scheduled to sunset on June 30th, 2019. The PR program is very beneficial to the city. It is an excellent workforce planning and succession planning tool. It allows an effective transfer of knowledge from the employee in the PRO to existing staff, including potential successors. With an unemployment rate of 2.1% in the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington, Minnesota, Wisconsin metropolitan statistical area as of October, which is the lowest in the country, and with 7.5% of our current workforce eligible to retire, continuing to have the PRO as a workforce planning tool for city leaders to leverage is extremely important. The PRO first became available to para members retiring May 23, 2009 or later. The Minneapolis City Council approved this for city employees later in 2009. As of November 26, there are currently 9 city employees participating, and since its inception, a total of 29 employees have participated in the program. On October 11th, the Para Board of Trustees voted unanimously to adopt recommendations to make the PRO a permanent option. Extending the PRO is also supported by the League of Minnesota Cities, the City of St. Paul, Hennepin County, the City of Rochester, and others. With that, I will take any questions people may have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from committee members? Also note that we've been joined by Councilmember Reich and Warsami. Not seeing any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Johnson, members of the IGR committee. My name is Trina Chernos. I am an assistant Minneapolis city attorney in the civil division. The proposals in my presentation are brought forward actually by 3 city departments, those being Human Resources, Finance, and the City Attorney's Office. Specifically, our presentation regards slides 4 and 5, which is the topic of city-paid continuation of health insurance for police officers or firefighters who demonstrate that as a direct result of an injury incurred during or a disease arising out of the performance of inherently dangerous duties that are specific to police and fire protection, they are eligible for duty disability retirement. Now, this benefit is pursuant to state law. For purposes of today's presentation, there exist in statute 3 types of retirement for para participants. So those being regular retirement, disability retirement, or duty disability retirement. This last type is the topic of our presentation. In a nutshell, our proposal has 2 parts. We seek this committee's support to improve the process mandated currently by state law for determining eligibility for the benefit, which is summarized on slide number 4, the first 2 bullet points on slide number 4. State funding of reimbursement is our second proposal related to this, and that is outlined for you in the 3rd bullet point. The reimbursement sought is the public employer's cost to provide continuation of health insurance for eligible employees until age 65. So let me get into a little bit of detail here with respect to the first 2 bullet points. So the first one, we're asking to support a legislative change to require para, for example, to provide the employer with a copy of the duty disability application and allow the public employer to present a meaningful response while the application is pending. Currently, the police and fire departments do not even know that an individual is applying to depart from city employment with the benefit of duty disability retirement. So as you might imagine, that could affect staffing levels, staffing projections, budget projections, a whole host of things, not knowing if an employee is returning to work or not. Another hurdle with the way the statute is currently set up is that The city's first notice is typically a worksheet that it gets from PARA that includes a variety of presumptuous questions. What work-related injury did the individual have? What have you given the employee the opportunity to have work within their restrictions? Sometimes the police and fire departments receive those worksheets and have no idea what injury or disease the person is even asserting they have incurred. So with the current process that is established and mandated by statute, that's very problematic for the city. With respect to the second bullet point there in the middle, an administrative law judge, actually two of them now, have recently ruled that public employers lack standing to challenge PARA's determination of eligibility for duty disability retirement. Yet we have learned that, in part through these hearings, that PARA's determination of duty disability typically drives PARA's determination of eligibility for the continuation of health insurance benefit, which is what the city has been paying. So, and that's one of the bases for, well, let me go backwards to stating that while we can as the city and have successfully appealed those determinations that an individual is eligible for continuation of health insurance benefits, it's a long process after a contested case hearing, and one of the successful bases on which the city, through the city attorney's office, appealed an applicant's award of eligibility was that the city was not given a meaningful opportunity to explore whether the disabilitant applicants had any work within their restrictions. So that is a summary of slide 4. For slide 5, these are the numbers, Chair and committee members. We want to thank Human Resources for compiling this data on the financials with respect to the benefit of continuation of health insurance. What the data on slide 5 represents is the cost to the city of paying medical premiums. The spreadsheet indicates, as you can see, that the number of applicants has risen steadily over time. And yet the spreadsheet also indicates that the amount of reimbursement paid by the state, Commissioner of Public Safety, to the city of Minneapolis has almost steadily decreased. There's only one exception that you'll see on the slide where it didn't dip 1 year. It went up 1 year, but then after that steadily went down again. That concludes the presentation of Finance, Human Resources, and the City Attorney's Office on these particular 2 slides. I will stand for questions if the Chair so requests.
Thank you. Are there any questions from committee members? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and committee members, my name is Katie Topinka. I'm the Housing Policy Coordinator at CPED, and I'm here to talk about 3 new proposals in the housing section, which starts on page 13 in your packet. And the first item I'm going to talk about is the last bullet under housing policy, and this relates to tax-exempt bonds. And I'm going to try to explain this briefly and as concisely as possible. The state receives an allocation of tax-exempt bonds from the federal government each year, and state statute determines how the allocation can be used. A significant amount of the state's tax-exempt bonding authority is designated for affordable housing, and the city receives its own entitlement of tax-exempt bonding authority. We pair that authority with low-income housing tax credits for affordable housing development. And this slide is a flow chart that Minnesota Housing Finance Agency has put together just to demonstrate currently how this authority kind of flows. And so you can see Minneapolis's entitlement on there. Also, there's a housing pool on there, and currently 31% of that housing pool is set aside for home ownership in the state. In recent years, there have been changes proposed at the legislature that would govern how the state, through Minnesota Management and Budget, allocates tax-exempt bonds. And when a proposal initially came through, there was not consensus among stakeholders, and one of the big sticking points was taking away that set aside for home ownership. So following the 2017 legislative session, a group of housing stakeholders that included the city came to consensus on five items that should make up any tax-exempt bond reform package. And although the proposed changes to date would not have directly affected the city's entitlement, the city supports changes that have broad consensus within the affordable housing community. So that's what this policy statement really says, is that policy changes to the allocation of federal tax-exempt bonds should have broad stakeholder agreement, increase efficiency and maximization of the resources, and ensure that they can serve various needs across the housing continuum. And then one final note on this, this policy is that at the end of last year's legislative session, there was a provision added to the bonding bill that took away the ability of Minnesota Housing to consider some items in its qualified allocation plan for projects seeking tax-exempt bonding authority. So our policy statement also just states that, or the proposed policy statement states that the city does not support proposals that would weaken the authority of issuing jurisdictions to employ policies that maximize the use of the public investment for affordable housing, such as cost reasonableness requirements. So move on to the next one if there are no questions there.
Not seeing any questions.
So the next new housing policy is this is the second bullet under housing policy on page 13. It's support for policies and funding to increase housing security and prevent displacement of renters and homeowners. With low vacancy rates, the strong housing market and rising rents, there are a lot of parts of the cities where current residents are at risk of being priced out of their rental housing or the homes that they own. And the city has been working on a number of strategies to prevent displacement. We're also part of this Anti-Displacement Policy Network through Policy Link that Council Vice President and Councilmember Ellison participate in that group, and working on developing strategies to try to prevent displacement. But state policies would assist the city in these efforts as well. And so that's why this policy statement is here, is proposed here. And the statement is that it would be to support policies and funding to increase housing security and to prevent displacement of renters and homeowners, such as policies that encourage acceptance of or prohibit discrimination against recipients of rental housing assistance, or policies that help preserve housing affordability for tenants, such as the 4D property tax classification, which the city is currently using to try to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. And that's a lower property tax classification allowed under state law for affordable housing. The statement is somewhat broad because we wanted to, in case there were new proposals that come up during the session, be able to incorporate those if possible. But the overall idea is to have different strategies that can prevent displacement.
We have a question or a comment from Vice Chair Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Mr. Pinker, I'm just curious if the language or policies around discrimination include, for people receiving rental assistance, includes any information around background checks or sort of credit histories, those kinds of things that can, in fact, limit people's opportunities in rental situations?
That's not specifically listed in this policy, and I'm just trying to, I might look to Sasha for help to see if we have that anywhere else. So no, that is not specifically listed here.
Okay, thank you. No, I think we need to look at ways to include language like that relative to background checks or various credit situations that can limit people's opportunities for rental. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just back on the last point, I think just maybe to echo something, I think there's a lot of growing interest, it's statewide and regionally in a lot of this work, and I'm really hopeful and optimistic that the various partnerships that are forming around, renter protection and this morning there was a meeting about unsheltered homelessness that I went to along with the mayor and the council vice president's office, working together with regional and state partners on that issue. And these anti-displacement policies keep coming up, and we know that really at the root of it, there's a lot of state law issues that need to be addressed. So I'm optimistic that our efforts and leadership at the city will be supported by a lot of partners.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, that again, this statement is intended to be somewhat broad to be able to incorporate things that could come up during the session, such as tenant protections items and other things.
Mr. Chair, Madam Vice President and Madam President, thank you for bringing up those points, and we can certainly work on an amendment to bring forward to recommend for adoption either later today or later in this meeting or at a future meeting after January 1st. So.
Council.
Can I respond?
Vice Chair, yes.
Thank you. I would suggest we work on it and bring it at a later date in January, as opposed to trying to craft something for this meeting.
Thank you.
All right, and then the last housing item is on page 14, and it's the fourth bullet down, and this is under funding for affordable housing and homelessness prevention. And this is really just about new significant investments in affordable housing. As the council is well aware, there are more than 15,000 Minneapolis households earning less than 30% of area median income who are housing cost burdened, meaning that they pay more than 30% of their income for housing. The budget that you're currently considering includes significant local investment in affordable housing, which will help the city create and preserve housing opportunities, but we also need significant support from the state in order to meet the city's needs. And so this policy position is supporting new and significant investments in affordable housing that can leverage investments made by the city. And so, the Homes for All, which is a group of housing advocates, is supporting a large bonding request. And then some of the other items that will be likely considered in the next legislative session include a state match for contributions to local housing trust funds, which the city has a housing trust fund. And then a state housing tax credit is also a proposal likely to be considered. And so this policy statement is really just voicing support for new significant investments that can leverage the important work that the city is committing to.
Great. Thank you. Council Member Schrader.
Well, I just want to thank you for, I'm really excited that we're supporting this and thank you for the work on that. I did want to highlight that a lot of I believe the last bit of legislation for this matching contributions to the local housing trust fund, it required a dedicated source of funding for that. And so I'd be, if that seems to be the way, I'd love to heads up so we can be working on that on the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, I know that IGR has been in discussions with the folks working on that to figure out how that will be crafted, so.
Well, thanks. It used to be me, so
right.
Now we can just talk about it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
I mean, hello. Right. Chair Johnson and members of the committee, I'm Patty Buller with the Health Department, and I have 4 proposals to bring before you. The first one deals with the opioid issue, and we know it's a major problem. Minneapolis has experienced a 300% increase in opioid deaths between 2011 and 2017. And we are wanting to put forward some new language to strengthen existing language and support a proposal that came up during the last legislative session, calling for dedicated pharmaceutical funding, industry-linked funding through mechanisms such as an opioid stewardship fee. And the funding would be used specifically for prevention, treatment, and other efforts to really deal with root causes of this issue. So that's the first issue.
Great.
Okay. The second issue deals with school-based health care. Our health department operates 7 clinics in high schools around the city, and we provide a range of confidential and very affordable medical care, and also mental health care to thousands of high school students each year. There is no state statute defining or certifying school-based health care, and defining it in statute would be a step towards obtaining some very needed state funding for our school-based clinic health system. We support school-based clinics primarily through grants and through some third-party reimbursement. But this is a program that kind of operates on fumes, and we need some kind of dedicated state funding to kind of keep this effort going. So this is a step in that direction.
Great. Thank you.
Questions?
Not seeing any. Thank you.
Okay. Next issue is the provider tax, and you may know that the provider tax, it's a 2% tax that medical and other health-related providers have to pay, but really what they do is they pass it on to consumers for a range of health services. The tax supports the Healthcare Access Fund, which supports a variety of safety net programs, and it also supports our SHIP program, which is the chronic disease prevention work that we're able to do in the city, or we call it healthy living work. The tax is going to sunset late 2019, early 2020. We feel that the sunset should be repealed. So we're asking the city to support the continuation of this tax or another sustainable funding source for programs funded through the Healthcare Access Fund like SHIP.
Great. Thank you. Not seeing any questions or comments on that.
Okay. And then the last issue is comprehensive state sex education. So current state statute calls for a focus on HIV/AIDS education, which is great, but it should also support more than that, and should support comprehensive sex education, which includes a whole range of factors like adolescent development, identity, culture, gender, and sexual orientation, pregnancy and reproductive health, contraceptive, healthy relationships, kind of the list goes on and on. And beyond just preventing sexually transmitted diseases and unintended pregnancies, there's a lot of benefits. It helps, if you've got kind of the full picture, it helps to improve academic success, prevent sexual abuse, dating violence, bullying, etc. So we'd like to see a provision in our legislative policies about supporting comprehensive sex education.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you. Not seeing any questions or comments on that.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Johnson, committee members. I'm Dave Herberholz. I'm the Director of Solid Waste and Recycling. And I'm here to ask for committee support for market development activities in recycling. Got 3 bullets up here. I'll start out with the first one that kind of emphasizes the beneficial situation that we're in. We residents of the city do a tremendous job at recycling. We've got very low contamination compared to other cities throughout the country, making our recyclables very attractive. And an advantage that we do have also is that we've got 3 large material recovery facilities in the city, and we've got experience using all of them for doing our recycling processing. Once again, just to talk about a little bit about recycling and where we're at, our contamination rate is around 10% or less in comparison to other cities that are in the neighborhood of 20 to 45%. So it's very reflective, once again, of the good work that the residents do. A little bit on markets and how they've been affected over the past 5 years, primarily due to the impact of China not allowing imports of recyclables to come into the country. They started this back in 2013 by showing their I guess, unhappiness for recycling coming from the states and other areas. because the quality of the recycling wasn't what they desired. And then they've had various policies over the past 5 years. You might have heard of them, the green fence in 13, the National Sword in 2017, and Blue Sky in this year, 18. All these policies from the Chinese were aimed at improving the quality of the recyclables coming into the country. And this last one, the Blue Sky Initiative, basically banned all shipment of recyclables, primarily mixed paper and plastic, from entering China. So the impact of that is that we've got a lot of recyclables surplus here in the United States. We're a little bit buffered from that being in the Midwest here. There's a lot of difficulty on the coasts that relied on sending their material overseas. So the third point that I have on here is that we really need to take care of our own recyclables here within the country. How do we do that? We do that from developing more markets for the material, both countrywide, regionally, and then locally. And we are very supportive and ask for support from the city for more local market development, being that we have these 3 major recycling facilities with a lot of good, clean product. We just soon have that product sent to either some reprocessing efforts or some manufacturing that was local here. And what is the impact of that? Well, the impact of having local recycling, whether it be processing or manufacturing, is number one, this material is looked at as a resource. It, compared to landfilling and trashing solid waste, generates more than 10 times as many jobs with recycling processing. And then when you go beyond that into more processing and manufacturing, an additional 25 jobs. So very impactful to keep the material close to home. And once again, in conclusion, I'd just like to ask for the committee's support. And I'll be here to field any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you for your work on this. Not seeing any questions or comments.
Okay, very good. And we've got a second item from Public Works, also in solid waste, and Kelly Kish from my staff will talk about composting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair
Good afternoon.
Johnson and committee members. As Mr. Herberholz had mentioned, I'm Kelly Kish, the recycling coordinator in the Division of Solid Waste and Recycling. I'm here today to present a proposed legislative item, the legislation and administrative rule changes that facilitate and encourage composting and organics collection and processing. And the reason that we are hoping for your support in adding this to the city's legislative agenda is that 30% of what the average Minnesotan throws away are things that could be composted. That, along with the city, county, and state recycling and composting goals, is one of the reasons why we started the organics recycling program to help keep those valuable materials out of waste-to-energy facilities and landfills and return the nutrients in them back into the soil to improve our soil quality. Currently, over 46% of eligible households in Minneapolis have signed up to participate in that program. And right now what we're seeing is what's depicted in the map here, that there are only 2 source-separated organic material composting facilities in the Twin Cities metro region. And these are the same 2 facilities that were there prior to these rule changes that were done by the Pollution Control Agency from 2005 to 2013. So there were some benefits of those rule changes. A huge one here in Minneapolis is that it created a tier for small site composting, which is what the majority of the community gardens in Minneapolis operate under now. And it did create the source-separated organic material composting facility, which does have some reduced restrictions from an MSW composting facility or municipal solid waste facility. But as you can tell, since we haven't had any new facilities opened in the Twin Cities metro region since these rules were implemented, they didn't quite go far enough. Also, the orange dot on the map there is the one transfer station that we have, or the transfer station that we use. So you can see these facilities we're shipping to our organics and yard waste to, they're over 40 miles away from us. It's a far distance to send our materials. It adds costs for transportation. It adds greenhouse gas emissions. And most recently, on November 27th, Hennepin County passed their changes to their solid waste ordinance 13, which is going to require large generating organics businesses to put in food diversion programs by 2020. And that ordinance change at the county level will require all cities in the county to implement residential collection programs by 2022. So the two facilities in existence are going to see a lot more material that need to be going to them, and the lack of availability and the lack of competition among facilities would likely increase the price that we have to pay to operate our organics recycling program and or yard waste programs in the future. So we look for your support to support legislation and administrative rule changes that facilitate and encouraging composting and organics collection and processing. And one thing I forgot to add, apologies, that in addition to the Ordinance 13 amendments the county made, there also is interest at the county level of looking to develop an anaerobic digestion facility, which is something that could be done a lot closer in different siting requirements than one of these large composting facilities. So the way that the language is written would also show that the city supports those activities as well. I can take any questions.
Thank you. Not seeing any questions Councilmember Ike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just commend the department for staying ahead of where the market's at, where the technology's at, and where our other jurisdictional partners are at, to just be at that edge. And so I really appreciate that work and don't underestimate its value.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's our last slide, correct? Do we have any additional comments or anything from staff?
Mr. Chair, we could walk just briefly through what the changes are recommended to the 2019 legislative agenda from last year, if you wish, and if not, that's okay too. The one other thing I would mention is there's just a couple of more substantive changes in the policy positions that were not presented. They're more staff recommended changes, and I could briefly mention those if that would be of committee interest.
I guess it's up to committee members. I personally feel pretty comfortable with it, having reviewed it. Other committee members? Is that fine with staff, committee members?
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Chair. And we just appreciate your time. Again, want to thank the staff that came in to present today, and we would recommend that the committee adopt the document.
Perfect. Thank you. I will go ahead and move approval of the 2019 legislative agenda and policy positions. And I just wanted to comment on this. Really want to thank our staff. First, all the staff that presented today on all these items. Very well thought out, obviously important issues for the city, and in many cases really technical issues as well. And I really appreciate all the effort that was put into it and put into this work by our staff as well in vetting these. And then a huge shout out to staff across the city in all the different departments, because they all really looked at this agenda and looked at issues affecting them and looked for opportunities to bring forward legislative ideas or changes to really advance the work and the goals of the city. And so there's a lot of effort put into this document that comes before us today, and it's just greatly appreciated, all the work that you've put into it. And with that motion in front of us, I'm also going to move an amendment, and I will pass this out to colleagues. Go. And I'm bringing forward an amendment with Councilmember Goodman. This is adding to our legislative agenda the city's support for the decriminalization, legalization, and taxation of recreational cannabis while ensuring the health and safety of the public, including children, expungement for past offenses, and considering ways to ensure equity in potential benefits, particularly for small businesses. I'll just speak to this for a moment. We all know our current legislative criminalization of cannabis, marijuana, is based off of antiquated ideas that were primarily resulting from racism. And it's been codified in states and nationally for generations. And I think people are waking up to the fact that it's failed policy. It's a failed prohibition. It criminalizes people of color disproportionately. It doesn't do a good job keeping youth from accessing it compared to other recreational drugs such as alcohol. In fact, it's usually easier for teens to get access because folks that are willing to break the law in the first place don't care who they're selling to as much as somebody who has a license that they face losing if they sell to teenagers. The current system is so ineffective that cannabis is still one of the nation's largest cash crops. And so I think we can look to the leadership we've seen in other states around this nation on this issue. And by supporting recreational marijuana and the legalization of recreational marijuana, which the incoming Walz and Flanagan administration support, we have a real opportunity here to create jobs that support small businesses as well and that promote consumer safety, that save law enforcement resources and direct them to where they're needed, and that generates critical revenue for important issues across our city and our state. And so we sure hope that this is something that I think is due, and I think that hopefully the legislature will support as well. Any discussion on that motion? Council Vice Chair Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Johnson and Councilmember Goodman, for bringing forward this amendment. And I am in support of adding this to our legislative agenda. I would like to offer an amendment to just include in the last sentence the very last statement, and considering ways to ensure equity and potential benefits, particularly for small businesses, I would like to amend that statement to include and considering ways to ensure equity and access by communities of color to potential benefits, particularly for small businesses.
I think that's great. Thank you. And just to check in with our clerk, can we just accept that in my amendment, or do we consider that a separate amendment on the amendment? Oh, there. Yes.
Chair Johnson, I think that you could consider this either way. We can account for it in the record.
Perfect. We'll consider that amendment accepted and then on this. Thank you.
Chair Johnson,
Yes,
can I just read it back to make sure that I have it accurate?
that would be great.
And considering ways to ensure equity and access by communities of color in potential benefits, particularly for small businesses.
Technically, I said two potential benefits. I'm not sure if to or in is the same.
Got it.
I think we'll go with 2. That makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional discussion on this? All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. And then we have before us the amended legislative agenda and policy positions with all of those recommendations by staff. Any further discussion or comments? Not seeing any. All those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you again for your work on this. And now we have one final item. It was a walk-on item related to opposing the federal government's policies restricting the ability to seek asylum in the U.S. and reaffirming the city's support for immigrants. And Council President Bender, did you want to move this item or make any comments on it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to move it. I don't know if staff wants to say anything briefly. I know we're short on time, but I just want to acknowledge staff's work on this and bringing it to our attention. And, I will say this too, we're closer to the Canadian border than to the Mexican border geographically, but our communities here in Minneapolis are diverse. I think it's extremely important that we stand together anytime any member of our community is under attack. And we did that when the federal government, implemented a Muslim ban, and we're doing this now as we look at the really egregious treatment by the Trump administration of folks who are seeking asylum in our country, as is their right to do, and is a foundational piece of our democracy that here in the city of Minneapolis we take very seriously, and we'll use all of the weight of our tools that we have at our disposal to fight on behalf of all of our residents and their relatives.
Great. Yes, please come on up and say a few words. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Committee Chair Johnson, President Bender, Vice President Jenkins, and other committee members. My name is Michelle Rivera. I'm the Director of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs for the City of Minneapolis. And I just wanted to make one additional note that December 10th is the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I think it's especially significant that the City of Minneapolis supports this proposed resolution. I'm very grateful to this committee. I'm very grateful to Chair Bender for sponsoring this resolution. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions on this? Not seeing any. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the motion carries. And seeing as how this is our last Intergovernmental Relations Committee meeting of the year, I'd just like to really thank our staff for all their work over this year, especially thinking back to, it seems like so long ago, the legislative session, but we have obviously a lot of changes both at a federal level and a state level and even among local government that have resulted from the elections. I know you're busy, very busy with preparing to make sure that the city is able to advocate to advance really important issues across all fronts as a result of those, and just greatly appreciate all of the work you continue to do with our partners. Committee Vice Chair Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I just wanted to give notice that I intend to bring an amendment to our 2019 legislative agenda at our next meeting related to conversion therapy to bring us in line with our neighboring states. Yeah, I just wanted to give my committee members notice that that will be coming in early 2019.
Thank you. And also a big shout out to our clerk, Kelly, and Susan, our support as well. Thank you for all the work you do on these issues and supporting this committee's work. So seeing no further business before this committee is adjourned.